The Frillnock slaver spat green phlegm in Kix's face as he tightened the electric shock collar on the small alien's neck. Kix yelped as the prongs dug into his rubbery skin. Around them, alien overseers cracked energy whips, herding the newly enslaved Mixari onto the transport ships. Screams and sobs filled the air. For generations, the Mixari had been bullied, subjugated, and dominated by the stronger alien races of the Galactic Council. Their protests and pleas fell on deaf ears. The Council was content to let them suffer. But then the humans arrived on the galactic scene. Aggressive, unpredictable, they refused to play by the old rules. The Council races denounced them as primitive upstarts. Privately, they feared humanity's rapid rise to power. As Kix stumbled onto the slave ship in shackles, he knew his species' only hope was to ally with the humans against their common enemy. The Mixari would do whatever it took to earn humanity's protection, or they would be enslaved and worked to death in the asteroid mines of a dozen worlds. Kix looked up at the stars, praying to the gods that the human diplomat would not be cowed by the Council at the negotiations starting today on Zephyria. The fate of his entire race hung in the balance. Jake burst into the secure meeting room at the United Earth Government headquarters in New York City. He had just returned from the disastrous negotiations on Zephyria and needed to report to the higher-ups immediately. The fate of humanity could depend on it. Admiral Mikhail Petrov, the grizzled head of Earth's military, scowled as Jake took his seat at the table. The admiral had a face like weathered granite, with piercing blue eyes that had seen too many battles. He radiated skepticism as Jake began outlining the situation. "The Galactic Council races are scheming bastards," Jake said bluntly. "They look at humanity and see fresh meat to bully and dominate, just like they've done to other races for generations. The Vorkarians in particular are just itching for an excuse to subjugate or exterminate us." Admiral Petrov grunted. "I've never trusted those alien pricks. They're too slippery. The only thing they respect is strength." Jake nodded. "Exactly. Which is why I think the Council is done negotiating. They'll never treat us as equals voluntarily. We need to force them to." The Admiral leaned forward. "What are you proposing, son, an arms race, a preemptive strike? Because I've got to tell you that's risky as hell. It could provoke them to come at us even harder." Jake shook his head vehemently. "No, that's the last thing we want. I'm proposing we level the playing field in a different way, by allying with the Council's other victims against them. There are dozens of species out there that have been bullied and enslaved, like the Mixari. If we unite with them, the Council won't be able to push us around so easily." Admiral Petrov looked unconvinced. He rubbed his chin, his eyes narrowing. "Awful lot of ifs in that plan, Jake. How do we know these other races will side with us against their oppressors? They might be too scared, and even if they do, will it be enough to intimidate the Council?" Jake leaned forward earnestly. "It's a risk, I know, but it's one we have to take, because the alternative is to sit back and wait for the Vorkarians and their goons to grind us into the dirt. We need allies, and we need them fast." The room fell silent as the Admiral mulled it over. The other UEG officials shifted in their seats, waiting for his verdict. Finally, Petrov sighed. "All right, Jake. You've convinced me that we need to do something. I'll give you a chance to reach out to these potential allies, but you're on a tight leash. I want regular reports, and if I feel like you're putting Earth at risk, I'll yank you back here faster than light. Got it?" "Got it, sir," Jake said, barely able to contain his excitement. "I won't let you down." As the meeting broke up, Jake was already making mental plans. The Admiral had agreed to give him a small diplomatic team and a fast ship, the UES Prometheus. They'd need to move quickly and quietly to avoid attracting the Council's attention. Jake's datapad pinged with an incoming message as he strode out of the room. He glanced down and saw it was an encrypted transmission from Zix, his Clixian contact. The subject line read simply, "Potential Allies." Jake's heart raced as he opened the file and scanned the contents. It was a list of star systems where Zix believed they could find races willing to stand with humanity against the Council. races with old grudges and secret dreams of payback. Jake gripped the datapad tightly, a fierce grin spreading across his face. With this intel, maybe they really had a shot. The game was on. The US Prometheus dropped out of hyperspace on the outskirts of the Aldebaran system. Jake stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the view screen as a fleet of sleek silver ships materialized in front of them. "Sir, we're being hailed," the communications officer reported. Jake nodded. On screen. The image of a tall ethereal being filled the view screen. It had luminous opalescent skin and large almond-shaped eyes that seemed to peer into Jake's very soul. "Greetings," the being said, its voice melodic and soothing. "I am Zerath, leader of the Quicksand people. We have been expecting you." Jake bowed his head respectfully. "I am Jake, a representative of the United Earth government. We come in peace, seeking allies against the Galactic Council's oppression." Zerath's eyes glimmered with interest. "Come aboard my ship, we have much to discuss." As Jake stepped onto the Quicksand vessel, he couldn't help but marvel at its advanced technology. The walls shimmered with holographic displays, and the very air seemed to hum with energy. Zerath led Jake to a private meeting room, where they sat across from each other at a crystalline table. "My people have suffered under the yoke of the Vorkarians for generations," Zerath said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "They demand tribute and resources, and in return, they offer protection from threats that they themselves manufacture." Jake leaned forward, his eyes intense. "The Vorkarians are a blight on the galaxy. They seek to subjugate and control every race they encounter, but together we can stand against them." Zerath nodded slowly. "The Quicksands are not warriors by nature, but we have developed technologies that could be invaluable in this fight. Our holographic projectors can create illusions so realistic that they are indistinguishable from reality." Jake's eyes widened as he realized the implications. With that kind of tactical advantage, we could mislead and disorient the Vorkarian forces, making them vulnerable to attack. Zerath smiled. "Precisely. We have used these projectors to deceive the Vorkarians and secretly build our own fleet and defenses, but we cannot stand against them alone." Jake extended his hand. "That's why we're here. The United Earth government proposes an alliance between our peoples. We will share our advanced weapons technology with you in exchange for access to your holographic capabilities." Zerath grasped Jake's hand firmly, sealing the deal. "Together we will break the chains of oppression and forge a new future for our peoples." As the two leaders began discussing strategies and logistics, neither of them noticed the cloaked Vorkarian spy probe hovering just outside the window, its sensors trained on their every word. Light years away on the Vorkarian homeworld of Zephyria, Prylar paced angrily in his command center. The disappearance of the human diplomat and the increased activity near Vorkarian space had set off alarm bells in his mind. "I want to know what those hairless apes are up to," he snarled at his subordinates. "Send out our best spies, infiltrate their ships, hack their communications, do whatever it takes, but bring me answers." The spies saluted and hurried to carry out their orders. Using stolen quicksand technology, they managed to sneak aboard the Aldebaran fleet undetected, posing as quicksand crew members. It didn't take long for them to uncover the budding alliance between the humans and the Quicksands. They transmitted their findings back to Prylar, who slammed his fist on the console in rage. "Those insolent primates dare to conspire against us," he roared. "The Galactic Council must be informed of this treachery at once." But when Prylar presented his evidence to the Council, he was met with skepticism and indifference. The other races still viewed humanity as a primitive, backwater species, hardly worth their attention. Prylar's eyes narrowed dangerously. If the Council would not act, then he would take matters into his own hands. "Mobilize the fleet," he ordered his generals. "We strike at Earth and Aldebaran before this alliance can gain any further ground. We will crush the humans and their quicksand lapdogs and remind the galaxy why the Vorkarians are to be feared." As the Vorkarian warships began assembling, news of the impending attack reached Jake and Zerath. They looked at each other grimly, knowing that the time for planning and diplomacy had passed. "It seems our alliance will be put to the test sooner than we expected," Zerath said solemnly. Jake nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then let's make sure we give the Vorkarians a fight they'll never forget. It's time to gather our strength and show the galaxy what we're made of." Jake's fingers flew across the holographic display, his brow furrowed in concentration, as he coordinated the deployment of Allied forces. The Vorkarian fleet was closing in fast, their weapons primed and ready to unleash destruction upon Earth and Aldebaran. "Status report," Jake barked, his eyes never leaving the screen. "The Clixian warships are in position," a Quixan officer replied, his voice calm despite the tension in the room. "Their armor is holding steady." Jake nodded, a small measure of relief washing over him. The Clixians had been hesitant to join the fight at first, but Zerath's impassioned plea for unity had swayed them. Now their heavily fortified ships formed a formidable line of defense against the Vorkarian onslaught. "And the Xanthians?" Jake asked, his gaze shifting to another section of the display. "Their engineers have completed the upgrades to our weapon systems," Admiral Petrov reported gruffly. "We're ready to give the Vorkarians a taste of their own medicine." Jake allowed himself a grim smile. The Xanthians' technological prowess was unmatched, and their enhancements to the human and Quixan arsenals had given the Allies a fighting chance. Suddenly, an alarm blared throughout the command center. "Vorkarian ships have entered the Aldebaran system," a panicked voice shouted over the comms. Jake's heart raced as he watched the enemy fleet materialize on the screen, their angular ships bristling with weapons. This was it, the moment of truth. "Zerath now!" Jake yelled into his comm unit. On cue, the Quixan fleet shimmered and multiplied, their holographic projectors creating a dizzying array of decoys. The Vorkarian ships faltered, their targeting systems struggling to lock onto the real targets amidst the sea of illusions. Seizing the moment of confusion, the human and Clixian ships surged forward, flanking the Vorkarians on both sides. A barrage of enhanced weaponry tore through the enemy fleet, the Xanthian-designed projectiles ripping through their shields like tissue paper. On the bridge of the Vorkarian flagship, Pryla slammed his fist against the console in frustration. His ships were being decimated, picked off one by the Allies' coordinated assault. The Quixan's trickery had caught him off guard, and now his fleet was paying the price. "Damage report," Pryla snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. "Our shields are down to 20%, sir," a terrified Vorkarian ensign reported. "We can't take much more of this." Pryla's mind raced, desperately searching for a way to turn the tide of battle. Then his gaze fell upon the pulsing red button on his command chair, the activation switch for the Star Crusher. With a twisted grin, Pryla slammed his fist down on the button. "Let's see how the Allies handle this," he growled. Deep within the bowels of the Vorkarian flagship, the Star Crusher hummed to life, its energy core pulsing with an ominous glow. The weapon was designed to harness the power of a dying star, channeling its destructive force into a single devastating blast. But just as the Star Crusher was about to unleash its payload, a series of explosions rocked the flagship. Alarms blared and Vorkarian soldiers scattered as a team of human and Xanthian special forces stormed the engine room, their weapons blazing. "Sabotage the Star Crusher!" Jake's voice crackled over the comm unit of the human team leader. "We can't let them fire that thing." The Xanthian engineers worked quickly, their nimble fingers rewiring the Star Crusher's control systems. With a final, triumphant shout, they overloaded the weapon's power core, causing it to malfunction and explode. The resulting shockwave tore through the Vorkarian flagship, setting off a chain reaction of secondary explosions. Pryla barely had time to scream in rage before his ship was engulfed in a blinding flash of light. Across the battlefield, Allied ships struggled to outrun the expanding blast radius. The UES Prometheus, its hull already battered and scorched, found itself directly in the path of a massive chunk of debris from the destroyed Vorkarian flagship. Admiral Petrov, his face grim with determination, made a split-second decision. Engaging the Prometheus's emergency thrusters, he rammed the ship into the oncoming debris, using the Prometheus's own mass to deflect the wreckage away from the Allied fleet. The impact was catastrophic, and the Prometheus was torn asunder in a shower of twisted metal and sparking circuitry. Admiral Petrov, along with most of the ship's crew, was lost in an instant. Jake, watching helplessly from the command center, felt a wave of grief wash over him. Petrov had been a mentor, a friend, and now he was gone, sacrificing himself to save countless others. As the dust settled and the Allied ships regrouped, the true cost of their victory became clear. Dozens of ships had been lost, their crews consigned to the cold void of space. The survivors, battered and weary, could only marvel at the fact that they were still alive. In the days that followed, Jake met with Zerath and the other Allied leaders to chart a course for the future. It was clear that the Galactic Council, in its current form, was broken beyond repair. The Vorkarians' reign of terror had exposed the deep flaws in the system, the way it allowed the strong to prey upon the weak. "We must build something new," Zerath declared, his voice heavy with conviction. "A council that represents the interests of all races, not just the powerful few." Jake nodded in agreement, his own resolve hardening. The sacrifices of Admiral Petrov and so many others could not be in vain. The alliance between humans and the other bullied races had to mean something, had to lead to a better future for all. As the Allies began the long, arduous process of rebuilding and reforming the Council, Jake couldn't help but reflect on the bittersweet nature of their victory. They had won their freedom, yes, but the cost had been staggering. The scars of the conflict would linger for generations, a constant reminder of the price of standing up to tyranny. But even in the midst of his grief and exhaustion, Jake felt a flicker of hope. The Alliance had proven that unity and cooperation were the keys to survival in a hostile galaxy. If they could hold fast to those principles, if they could continue to stand together in the face of adversity, then perhaps there was a chance for lasting peace after all. With a heavy heart and a determination to honor the memory of the fallen, Jake prepared to lead the Allied races into an uncertain but hopeful future. The road ahead would be long and hard, but they would walk it together, united by the bonds of friendship and the scars of shared struggle. The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with a nervous energy as representatives from the Allied races took their seats. The victory over the Vorkarians was still fresh in everyone's minds, but there was no time to rest on their laurels. A new threat had emerged, one that threatened to undo everything they had fought so hard to achieve. Jake limped into the room, his injuries from the final battle still not fully healed. He had been looking forward to a well-deserved break, but duty called once again. As he took his place at the center of the chamber, he couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. How many times had he stood in this exact spot, rallying the troops for another impossible mission? "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Jake began, his voice still raspy from smoke inhalation. "I know we're all still recovering from the last fight, but we have a new problem on our hands." He nodded to Zix, who stepped forward and activated the holo-display. An image of a gaunt, pale-skinned humanoid appeared, his eyes glowing with an eerie red light. "This is Nearless, leader of the Voidbringers," Zix explained. "They're a race we thought died out eons ago, but apparently they just went into hiding. And now they're back with a vengeance." Zerath leaned forward in his seat, his brow furrowed. "What do they want? Why reveal themselves now?" "We believe they're after something called the Infinity Gate," Jake replied. "It's an ancient artifact that supposedly grants its wielder control over reality itself. If Nihilus gets his hands on it—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The looks of horror on the faces of the assembled representatives said it all. "We have to stop them," Zerath said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Jake nodded. "That's why I've called you all here. We need to put together a team to track down the Voidbringers and destroy the Infinity Gate before they can use it." He turned to a woman sitting in the front row, her dark hair pulled back into a tight bun. "Dr. Voss, I understand you've been studying the gate. What can you tell us about it?" Ilara Voss stood up, her eyes shining with excitement. "The Infinity Gate is one of the most fascinating artifacts I've ever come across," she said. "It's a conduit for a type of energy we've never seen before, one that seems to defy the laws of physics as we understand them." She brought up a series of complex equations on the holo display. "Based on my research, I believe the gate's power source is inherently unstable. If we can find a way to overload it, we might be able to destroy the artifact and prevent anyone from using it again." Jake grinned. "That's the kind of outside-the-box thinking we need on this mission. Dr. Voss, welcome aboard." As the team began to take shape, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were in for the fight of their lives. Nihilus had been one step ahead of them at every turn, manipulating events from the shadows like some kind of cosmic puppet master. But Jake refused to let that stop him. He had made a promise to protect the galaxy, and he intended to keep it. The UES Unity, a sleek new warship fresh off the assembly line, sliced through the void of space like a silver arrow. On the bridge, Jake stood beside Zerath and Zix, watching the stars streak by on the view screen. "Any leads on where Nihilus might be hiding?" Jake asked. Zix shook his head. "None so far. He's gone completely off the grid." Zerath frowned. "He's out there somewhere biding his time. We have to find him before it's too late." Suddenly an alarm blared through the ship. Dr. Voss rushed onto the bridge, her face pale. "Captain, I've just picked up a massive energy surge on long-range sensors," she said breathlessly. "It matches the signature of the Infinity Gate." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Where?" "A planet called Necropolis," Dr. Voss replied. "It's a desolate world on the edge of known space." Zerath's eyes widened. "I've heard of Necropolis," he said softly. "It's said to be a cursed place haunted by the ghosts of the dead." Jake set his jaw. "Ghosts or no ghosts, that's where we're headed. Helm, set a course for Necropolis, maximum speed." As the Unity leapt into hyperspace, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But what choice did they have? The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could stop Nihilus and his Voidbringers. The Necropolis loomed before them like a nightmare made real, its surface a twisted landscape of jagged rocks and ominous black spires. As the Unity touched down on a barren plateau, Jake and his team emerged from the ship, their weapons at the ready. "The energy readings are coming from that structure up ahead," Dr. Voss said, pointing to a massive obsidian tower that seemed to pierce the sky itself. Jake nodded. "Then that's where we're going. Stay sharp, everyone. We don't know what kind of surprises Nihilus has in store for us." As they approached the tower, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Nihilus himself, his gaunt face twisted into a cruel smile. "Welcome to my domain, Captain," he said, his voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "I've been expecting you." Jake raised his weapon, his finger hovering over the trigger. "It's over, Nihilus. Surrender the Infinity Gate and come quietly." Nihilus threw back his head and laughed. "You still don't understand, do you? The gate is mine, and with it I will reshape the very fabric of reality itself. Your pathetic alliance is nothing before the power of the Voidbringers." With a wave of his hand, Nihilus summoned a swirling vortex of dark energy that engulfed the team. Jake felt himself being pulled off his feet, his body twisted and contorted by the unnatural forces at work. Through the maelstrom, he saw Dr. Voss struggling to reach the base of the tower, where the Infinity Gate pulsed with an eerie blue light. She was trying to overload the artifact's power core, just as she had planned. But Nihilus was too strong. With a flick of his wrist, he sent Dr. Voss flying backwards, her body slamming into the jagged rocks with a sickening crunch. Jake screamed in rage and frustration, but there was nothing he could do. The vortex was tearing him apart, atom by atom. And then, just as all seemed lost, Zerath leapt into action. With a burst of telekinetic energy, he shielded Jake from the worst of the maelstrom, giving him a chance to catch his breath. Together, they fought their way towards the tower, dodging blasts of dark energy and waves of Voidbringer soldiers. But even as they reached the base of the structure, they knew they were too late. The Infinity Gate was activating, its power core overloading just as Dr. Voss had predicted. But instead of destroying the artifact, the energy was being channeled directly into Nihilus himself. The Voidbringer leader screamed in ecstasy as the power of the gate flowed through him, his body glowing with an otherworldly light. Jake and Zerath could only watch in horror as Nihilus began to transform, his flesh melting away to reveal a being of pure darkness. "You fools," Nihilus cackled. "Did you really think you could stop me? I am the Void Incarnate, the end of all things, and now with the power of the Infinity Gate at my command, I will remake the universe in my own image." Jake gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They had to stop Nihilus before it was too late, but how? The Voidbringer was too powerful, too far gone. And then he saw it, a flicker of light deep within the heart of the Infinity Gate. The power core was still intact, still feeding energy into Nihilus. If they could somehow sever that connection. "Zerath!" Jake shouted over the roar of the maelstrom. "We have to destroy the power core. It's the only way to stop him." Zerath nodded, his face grim. "I'll distract him, you take the shot." With a burst of telekinetic energy, Zerath leapt towards Nihilus, his body glowing with a brilliant white light. The two titans clashed in mid-air, a swirling vortex of darkness and light that threatened to tear the very fabric of reality apart. Jake took aim with his weapon, his hands shaking. He had one chance, one shot to end this. He breathed in deep, steadied his nerves, and fired. The blast hit the power core dead center, shattering it into a million pieces. Nihilus screamed in agony as the energy flow was cut off, his body convulsing with uncontrollable spasms. But even as the Voidbringer fell, the damage had been done. The Infinity Gate was imploding, collapsing in on itself like a dying star. The ground beneath their feet began to shake and crack as the entire planet threatened to tear itself apart. "We have to get out of here," Jake shouted, grabbing Zerath by the arm. But the Quixen was badly injured, his body broken and bleeding from his battle with Nihilus. "Go," Zerath whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the collapsing planet. "Save yourself, Jake. The galaxy needs you." Jake shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I'm not leaving you behind. We started this together and we'll finish it together." With a burst of strength, Jake hoisted Zerath onto his shoulders and began to stumble towards the Unity. The ground was heaving and buckling beneath their feet as the planet began to collapse in on itself. They had almost reached the ship when a massive chunk of debris came hurtling towards them. Jake tried to dodge, but he was too slow. The rocks slammed into them, sending them tumbling to the ground. Jake felt a searing pain in his leg and knew it was broken. He tried to stand, but his body wouldn't cooperate. Beside him, Zerath lay still, his eyes closed. "Zerath," Jake whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Don't do this to me, buddy. We've come too far to give up now." Zerath's eyes fluttered open and he smiled weakly. "It's all right, Jake. This is how it was meant to be. The galaxy is safe thanks to you. That's all that matters." Jake shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, it's not all right. I can't lose you, not like this. We were supposed to build a better future together." Zerath reached up and clasped Jake's hand in his own. "You will build that future, Jake. You and the others. The Alliance will live on, stronger than ever, and I will always be with you, in spirit." With a final smile, Zerath closed his eyes and breathed his last. Jake let out a howl of grief and rage, his heart shattered into a million pieces. But there was no time to mourn. The planet was tearing itself apart and they had to get out of there. With a burst of strength he didn't know he had, Jake lifted Zerath's body onto his shoulders and staggered towards the Unity. Zix was waiting for them at the airlock, his face pale with fear. "Jake, thank the stars, we have to go now." Jake nodded, his jaw set with grim determination. He carried Zerath's body onto the ship, laying him gently on the deck. Then he turned to Zix, his eyes hard. "Get us out of here," he said, his voice like steel, "and set a course for the Galactic Council. We have work to do." As the Unity blasted away from the dying planet, Jake stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the stars. The weight of the galaxy rested on his shoulders, but he would not falter. He would carry on the legacy of those who had fallen and build a better future for all. The Galactic Council was in chaos when they arrived, representatives from a dozen races shouting and arguing over each other. Jake limped to the center of the chamber, his broken leg throbbing with every step. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the din like a knife. "The Voidbringers have been defeated, but at a great cost. Dr. Voss gave her life to destroy the Infinity Gate, and Zerath—" His voice broke, and he had to take a moment to compose himself. "Zerath sacrificed himself to save us all." A murmur of shock and grief rippled through the chamber. Zerath had been a respected leader, a champion of unity and cooperation. His loss would be felt throughout the galaxy. Jake took a deep breath and continued, "But we cannot let their sacrifices be in vain. The Voidbringers may be gone, but there will always be new threats, new dangers lurking in the shadows. We must stand together, united as one, if we are to face them." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each representative in turn. "The old ways are gone. The days of division and mistrust are over. We must forge a new path, one of cooperation and mutual respect. Only then can we build a galaxy that is safe and prosperous for all." There was a moment of silence as the weight of Jake's words sank in. Then, one by one, the representatives began to nod. They had seen the cost of division, the price of hatred and fear. They knew that Jake was right. As the council began to debate and plan for the future, Jake slipped away. He had one final duty to perform. The UES Unity hung in orbit above Earth, a shining beacon of hope and unity. On the bridge, Jake stood before a small group of his closest friends and allies, his eyes fixed on the view screen. "Zerath was a true hero," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He gave his life to save the galaxy, and we will never forget him. But he would not want us to mourn forever. He would want us to carry on his legacy, to build the future he dreamed of." He turned to face the others, his eyes shining with determination. "That is what we will do. We will honor his memory by creating a galaxy where all races can live in peace and harmony. We will stand together, united as one, against whatever threats may come." As the others nodded in agreement, Jake turned back to the view screen. The stars stretched out before them, a vast and endless expanse of possibility. "Set a course for the future," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "We have work to do." The UES Unity leapt into hyperspace, a shining silver arrow piercing the darkness. And on the bridge, Jake stood tall and proud, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For he knew that he was not alone, that he had the strength and courage of a united galaxy behind him. And together, they would build a better tomorrow, one star at a time. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.